You're listening to the Inside Syracuse Basketball Podcast presented by Kraus Health, the exclusive healthcare partner of Syracuse Athletics.
Well, welcome back to another edition of the Inside Syracuse Basketball Podcast. And today we're going to be talking about the ACC schedule. The ACC schedule was released on Tuesday night, so we now have the Syracuse basketball team's entire schedule for the upcoming season. And to go over the schedule and what are some of the big games, what are some of the sneaky good games, is my colleague at syracuse.com, Donna Ditota. Donna, I know we're alike in this. I think the schedule release day is like Christmas for us in some respects.
Yeah. In some respects, because we know where approximately we will be on a lot of days in the winter. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I look forward to basketball season.
Me too.
We have to work, we have to cover these games, so we're not. It's not exactly the same, but in terms of just the anticipation of schedule and the big games we're going to be looking forward to now, we're like the fans. We get excited about this.
We do.
If we find out when Duke or Carolina is coming to the Dome, or if there's a big road trip, I start really circling dates on the calendar, just like I know a lot of my friends did last night.
Right.
So which of the dates were the first ones you were looking for? Which ones did you circle on your calendar?
I think you and I were both talking about Duke. When is Duke going to come? Duke's obviously the big game. Malik Brown will be back here. Cooper Flagg will be here. Duke is supposed to be the best team in the conference this year. It's on a Wednesday night, which I'm sure Syracuse fans will bemoan. But, the fact is Duke can't play every single road trip on a Saturday. So, sometimes they have to play teams during the week. And they are going to come here on a Wednesday night. And I think that's going to be probably the highlight game. That's what I would say. How about you?
Yeah, Duke, the whole Cooper Flagg show, I think is going to be crazy. And one of my most recent podcasts, I had Brendan Marks of The Athletic on. He's located down there in the Triangle area and covers Duke and Carolina, all those teams. And he was like, the build-up for Cooper Flagg is unlike anything he's seen for a Duke player since Zion Williamson.
Yeah, so I was just we were just on vacation in Maine and just happened to strike up a conversation with a guy at a brewery, and he was a big Cooper Flagg guy. So in addition to having already anticipated Cooper Flagg, this guy in Maine was telling me how awesome Cooper Flagg is. So Cooper Flagg's going to be interesting, and so is Duke this year.
Yeah, they really are. So that'll be a big one. That's on a Wednesday, like you said. Forget the exact date. I got it right here.
February
Wednesday,
5th.
February 5th.
Yeah.
Another game I was looking at, and I was probably anticipating the arrival of Duke and Cooper Flagg and Malik Brown, just like you. But then when I saw the North Carolina game,
It's
going to be on a Saturday.
Yeah.
Maybe not exactly prime time. It's not like an 8 or 9 o'clock, but it's a 6 o'clock game. So it's not like they're going to be starting this at noon and the student section's going to be wiping the sleep out of their eyes and coming in, just before tip. Now, this game's going to have some build up too. I think we're probably looking at the biggest crowd of the year when Carolina comes to town on Saturday, February 15th.
Yeah, I'd say so too. And North Carolina has one of two guys who were first team all ACC last year who are back this year. The other one is Hunter South, who we could talk about later when I talk about one of my sort of interesting games that I think is going to come. But obviously Carolina is a big power name in the conference. They're good every year. They're a good rebounding team every year. And it'll be interesting to see what happens when they come here on a Saturday, because that place is going to be jumping. And I mean, I don't know what the official sellout rate is at the Dome. Do you for basketball?
I did know the number. I know it's less than
record. Right. It's less than the record. So it's going to be, it won't set a record, but it might say a new in the new era record. So yeah.
Right. Yeah. It could be what they will consider capacity for basketball now at the Dome.
Right.
Syracuse's biggest win last year, arguably, was that home game against North Carolina.
Right.
Carolina comes back to the Dome, and it's always interesting. It's usually when we go to road games, there's so many Syracuse fans that go to road games.
Yeah.
North Carolina is like that one team where a lot of Carolina fans will come up to the Dome. They've got their baby blue hoodies on and jerseys and stuff like that.
Wait by the tunnel. They hang out by the tunnel to slap the players' hands. Yep.
They really do. They congregate right there. They want to get the hand slapped or a photo if they can get it. So that Carolina game will be big. You know what I would love to see? He's been fighting cancer for a long time now.
Oh, yeah.
I would love to see Dick Vitale at the Dome that
It
night.
would be great. It would be
Just,
great.
I don't know, if he'll be back at that, far along in his recovery or not. But let's send out some positive vibes to our pal.
All right.
That'll be really cool. So I think we've already hit on two games. For one category, I was going to ask you about is what are like the big resume booster games. Now, obviously, Carolina and Duke at home should be quad one games. We're already talking quad one in October.
Yeah. I
What are
think
some of is there any other resume booster out there that you can see?
in the conference, I mean, obviously, if they win at Tennessee, that's a huge win. Tennessee's going to be very good this year. Like even the game, the Maryland game in Barclays is going to be a big game. Road and neutral site games are obviously huge games. The
Yep.
whole Gotham class, the whole what's the tournament down in the Legends Classic?
It's the Legends, yeah, with
And that's going to
Texas.
be, yep, that'll be a big one. In terms of the conference, I mean, the game at Clemson, I think is going to be big. Clemson has one of my favorite guys in the league, and Ian Shufflin, he's back. Chase Hunter is back. I think they're going to be pretty good. They've got the guard Jaden Zachary from BC, who I think is very good. So I think that's going to be a big game. The game at Clemson, that could be a resume booster too. I think Pittsburgh's going to be pretty good.
I
So,
do too.
going to Pittsburgh and playing that game again, all these road games. The Miami also I think is going to be good. Miami has Jalil Bethea, who Syracuse recruited, was a McDonald's All-American, and they also returned Nigel Pack. They have Matthew Cleveland back.
Matthew Cleveland,
So I
and they
think
have the kid from Virginia Tech. I mean, I know they
that's
lost
right,
Normad
right,
Omier,
right.
but Lynn Kidd.
Right, who was one of the most improved players in the league last year. And yes, he's going to play for them this year. And I think Miami's going to be a tough road game too. So I think, I would say, resume boosters at Clemson, at Miami, in terms of conference games. What are your, and at Pittsburgh? I think Pittsburgh's going to be good.
I think you hit on them. I think you hit on them. One team, and to be a quad one game when you're playing at home, that team's got to be in the top 30. That's tough. I
Yeah,
think, right now we're thinking Carolina and Duke might be the only ACC teams that are going to qualify off SU's schedule. But one team to watch is Wake Forest.
I really, really like that team. I just talked about it earlier. I love Hunter Salas. I think he's really good. They have a guy named
Efton
Omaha
Reed.
Billieu, and hopefully I'm not butchering his name, but he was a five-star recruit out of high school. Didn't quite have a great season at Iowa State last year. Efton Reed is back.
Right.
I'm interested to see what happens with Tyler Johnson. He didn't have a great year last year at Louisville, but that team was sort of a train wreck of a team. And the coach down there loves his little guards, and he's a small little speedy guard. And I think that they're going to be good. I really do.
I think they're going to fly under the radar a little bit, but that is a home game for Syracuse. It's going to be played on New Year's Eve day.
Right, right.
So there'll be no students. I don't know what kind of crowd you'll get, but it is an earlier tip. So if you have New Year's Eve plans, you can still go to the Dome and see Syracuse Wake Forest. But that way, Wake could end up being a quad one or a really high quad two game, even though it's at home for Syracuse.
Well, you will also get
Now,
to see the 7 foot, 250 pound Efton Reed against Eddie Lampkin, which I think will also be an interesting matchup.
fun times.
Yeah.
That'll be great, right? So yeah, I think there are a lot of resume boosters potentially out there for Syracuse. But what about the sneaky games? The sneaky good, could be sneaky bad, a sneaky
Yeah.
game, but it's like, that could hurt you. I think the schedule's littered with them.
Uh,
I think
yeah.
because I think the ACC is full of teams that we don't know how they're going to be, but somebody is going to end up being fourth, fifth, sixth in this conference, right? And it could be a whole host of teams.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of those teams, is I think opening at Notre Dame is an interesting game just because they have two very good guards, right? And Syracuse is coming off, I think they come off a road trip, right? From when they play
That's right after going to
Notre Dame.
Tennessee for the SEC
Yeah, so
Challenge.
and then they're going to be gone for, I don't know if they'll probably stay. I don't know what they're going to do, but they may stay the whole time and just go from Tennessee to South Bend. I don't know what they'll do, but that is
Yeah,
kind of a sneaky tough opening game for Syracuse just because of those two very good guards they have.
it's funny. You would think we were like trading notes before this recording this. That was the number one game I had on mine. Both home and away because Notre Dame is one of the three teams Syracuse will play twice.
Right.
You mentioned the guard said about, Marcus Burton was the ACC Freshman of the Year.
Yep.
And it's very interesting. Some other ACC freshmen went pro. Marcus Burton did not. He is back. They got 4 starters back.
They do.
If this team, including the coach's son,
That's right.
Shrewsbury, who lit Syracuse up at the Dome, nearly led Notre Dame from, like, I don't know, Syracuse was ahead like 20 something. That was Jim Bay day.
He was
Everybody
a very,
was
very
in
good. She's a
party
very
mode.
good shooter. Yeah.
It was a party at the Dome until
Yeah.
Notre Dame nearly just ruined the entire evening. But that'll be an interesting team. There's a few others on there. You kind of mentioned a few. Sneaky game. We don't know how hard it's going to be to travel all the way to the West Coast and play 2 road games back to back.
Right.
In Stanford and Cal. Syracuse has to do it this year. Other teams are going to have to do it too. Notably, 2 that are not going to have to do it are North Carolina and Duke.
Shockingly, those 2 teams are not playing at all on those new teams.
And before we get any calls from the ACC office, we know the schedule is set for several years down the road, and I'm sure next year Duke and Carolina will go to the Bay Area.
I do.
But
I do want to do. I mean,
interesting.
Yeah, they are. Right. It'll be interesting to see what happens with them this year, with next year, or the next coming years. But I don't know that they will have, just because they're in the middle of ACC country. I don't know if they will have nearly the miles that Syracuse is going to put on this year, because Syracuse is such an outlier in terms of geography. I mean, they're going to have to they got to go to Miami, they got to go to Florida State, they got to go to SMU, they got to take the trip to California. They're going to Notre Dame. I think the only one they didn't really hit is probably like Louisville. That's also kind of a distance away. They're not going to any North Carolina schools, which is just bizarre how it's possible that you could spend an entire year and not play any of the teams in North Carolina. But that's happened before.
It has happened before. And the sad thing
weird.
is I know you're like me. The bad part of it is there's so many Syracuse alumni down in that area, and now they don't have a chance to see Syracuse even once somewhere close to them.
Yeah.
So that's kind of
it's just weird. It's weird.
An anomaly in the schedule or a bug. I don't think it's a feature. It's definitely a bug.
Yeah.
So that'll be, whatever. So they don't get to go to Wake, and we don't get to see a whole host of Syracuse fans in Winston-Salem or wherever. So,
yeah.
But they'll get over that. Anything else? But I got a few other things I want to ask you about the schedule. But
yeah, I do think. Yeah, I mean, I do think that the stretch of at Miami, North Carolina home, at Pittsburgh, and then NC State home is going to be a pretty rough little stretch there. NC State's going to be picked to go be in the upper half of the league. They have some of their players back from last year's big Final Four push. And I think they'll be decent. I don't know how good Georgia Tech is going to be, but that's another game where both the Wake Forest game and the Georgia Tech game, the students won't be here in Syracuse, and so it's always tough to get sort of some energy in the building when the students aren't around. And I think Georgia Tech is decent. And I obviously I think Wake is very good. So those will be tough games when the students aren't here. That I think is worth noting. I'm also curious to see what happens with Louisville. I mean, they have completely decimated their roster from last year, and they've completely overhauled. Pat Kelsey's their new coach. They've completely overhauled their roster. They've got a lot of pretty good players. But it's interesting to see how quickly they can turn it around, and what the chemistry issue will be like with them too. If they quickly gel, I think that could be a pretty tough team.
I agree, but it's so funny. You talk about how quickly they can gel, and their very first ACC game, and that game in early December, is at home against Duke.
Oh, good Lord. Yeah.
I'm like, oh my God, attention, Louisville, you might want to get it ready soon,
Although, I mean, you could say the same thing. They might be catching Duke before Duke really gets going. So, it's another way to look at it. Yeah.
A lot of freshmen. So,
right.
Yeah.
And new guys. I mean, that's a new team, pretty much.
And it's really interesting. Sunday games. There's a handful of Sunday games on the ACC schedule. And that one in early December is the very first one. That'll be on the ACC network on December 8th at 6:00. So kind of interesting there. Few other features here. Syracuse, last game, the finale of the year, is at home this year.
Right.
Last year, it was a really awkward or weird ending of the season for Syracuse.
It was.
They played their last 2 games on the road. their senior night was a midweek game, and then they hit the road for games at Louisville and Clemson. And then the last Saturday, they were the team that had the bye. They were the odd
Yeah,
team out. So,
it was really weird.
it was I think it was like the earliest home finale in about 8 years.
Yeah.
But this year, it's different. They're going to get to end the season at home against Virginia. And I was looking at the schedule, the whole conference wide schedule. As of now, that is the last tip off of the day on that
Okay.
last Saturday. Now, there are 4 games that are to be determined in terms of start times. But, the traditional North Carolina Duke game is a 6:30 tip off that night. And then you get Virginia Syracuse at 8.
Yeah.
That could be a big game.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, it's going to be, I don't know how good Virginia's going to be. I think people think they're going to be better than I think they're going to be, but we'll see how good they're going to be. And, they're always competitive. They're always tough defensively. That's at that point, you would think Syracuse is what it is, right? And you would think all these teams are what they are. And so it'll be interesting to see sort of the journeys of both of those teams during the season and what happens on that last day.
If we're looking at a Syracuse team that's on the bubble or closer and trying to, boost its resume at the end of the season, you're looking at back-to-back road games at Virginia Tech and SMU, and then ending the season with that home game against Virginia. Those could be 3 vital games because road games are key to your resume, and then a home game against Virginia.
Yeah, I do think the stretch, the Miami, North Carolina, Pittsburgh, NC State stretch, that's a huge stretch because at that point, I think that could determine a whole lot of things. That happens in February 11th to February 26th is the span of those games, and those are all very good teams, and all those could be at that point must-win games, and we'll see. I mean, we have any idea how good Syracuse is going to be, right? We have an inkling. We've not seen them play a single minute of a single real game. We haven't even seen a practice. So we don't know how good they're going to be. And so we're talking sort of just theoretically what could happen. So, but I do think that stretch of games is going to be a telling stretch for them.
One thing I was looking at was the Monday night games, call them Big Monday on ESPN.
Yep.
There's the very first one of the year, early January, and I think we still have Monday Night Football at that point.
Are they Tuesday?
What's that?
Are they Tuesday games? I don't see a lot of.
No, there's some Monday games. Like the very first one is January 13th, and you get Boston College, Notre Dame. Like I said, though, I think you still get NFL Monday Night Football. So I don't know. BC Notre Dame is going to be watched by BC Notre Dame fans, and all the NFL people will be watching NFL games. But after that one, there are 6 other Monday nighters on ESPN. No, I'm sorry, 7. 7, starting on Monday, January 27th.
Okay.
6 of those 7 have either North Carolina or Duke in them. And in a way, I get it. This isn't the ACC that did this. This was ESPN that did this. They know who the 2 best teams are, or they think they do in the ACC, and they want them. They want either Carolina or Duke, and that's what they've got starting on Monday, January 27th, when NC State goes into Cameron Indoor to play Duke. After that, it's 6 out of the 7 Big Mondays have either Carolina or Duke in them. The only exception is Virginia at Pitt in early February.
I thought you were talking about Syracuse playing on Monday games, and I was so confused all of a sudden in the beginning.
No, no Syracuse.
I get you. Yeah, no Syracuse. I look at the schedule, I was like, am I reading this wrong? Do they play
No. I just jumped. I just made a jump to conference-wide stuff here.
Yeah, I was slightly confused, but go ahead.
And it's interesting. The opponents for Duke and Carolina are NC State, Clemson, Virginia, Florida State, Wake, and then each other.
Yeah.
Duke, there is a Duke, Carolina game on a Big Monday, and then there's the traditional last Saturday Duke Carolina game.
Yeah.
But I think ESPN is telling everybody, hey, we think we know who's good, and this is who we want on.
I am voting in the top 25 again this year and the AP top 25. And those are going to be, from the outset, probably the only 2 ACC teams I will pick. Although, like I said before, I really like Wake. I really like Miami. I like a lot of I think Clemson's going to be pretty. I mean, I like a lot of teams. I don't know if there are any great teams, but I don't know nationally who are the great teams either. I mean, it's so hard to tell with the transfer portal now because entire rosters are completely and utterly reclaimed, I guess, for lack of a better word. And it's hard to tell, if a player is good on one team, like how good will Norchad Omier be at Baylor? I don't know. He was very good at Miami, but you don't know how some of this stuff was going to translate, how the coaches are going to use them, what kind of offenses they're going to play, what kind of defenses they're going to play. So a lot of times it's really hard to sort of project what the great teams, even in the league or just nationally, are going to be.
Yeah, I agree with you. I look at the ACC and I'm like, I don't know. I barely have a feeling for how Syracuse is going to
Right.
be, and that's the team I know the best. So it's really hard to tell you how good Virginia Tech's going to be. One of the best examples is Louisville, and you mentioned them earlier.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a single player on this year's roster that was playing for them last year.
Not
Uh,
one.
a whole host of transfers. Brendan Marks of the Athletic, who I mentioned earlier, he has them third in the league. But meanwhile, Chris Dortch at Blue Ribbon Yearbook, I want to say had Louisville eighth or ninth. Those guys both know basketball. They did their research. They didn't just do this in 15 minutes jotting down names. It's really interesting how those two guys can have a team like Louisville. It's so far apart, third and ninth or whatever it was. And I think it's because it's just so hard to get a handle on. It's like,
Yeah, I think Louisville has a lot of very, very good pieces. I know they had a huge NIL budget, so they spent a lot of money in the portal. One thing I've noticed, Noah Waterman will be coming back home. This is probably the closest he will be playing to home. He's from like the Penn Yan, Seneca Falls type area, and he's going to play. He plays for Louisville. He's a transfer, and but they have a lot of guys who I think they spent a lot of money on this year. But the thing is, let's see what happens to them in terms of how they can coalesce. I think they can be really, really good. I do. But we just don't know. It's hard to judge what players are going to look like from one roster to a different roster, from one system to another system. So that's, I guess, to be determined. But I totally see where Brendan would pick them third. I think they could be really good. I don't think they'll
yeah,
be 10th. I think they'll be better than that.
he
I think
could look
Pac-12
like a
can be both.
genius. Brendan could look like a genius if Louisville turns out to be that good. Like,
Yeah.
wow, you were the only
I
one that
don't,
had him
I
third in
don't,
the league.
I don't think they'll be 10th. I mean, I think that I think he's a very good coach, and I think he has a lot of good players. So,
That West Coast trip. I keep going back to these new additions to the ACC. I mean,
yeah,
SMU is new to the league. They're down in Dallas. You can't really partner a road trip to SMU with anybody. So, we'll see how teams handle that one. But anybody that goes out west to play Cal is also going to play Stanford on that same trip.
right.
The first teams that get the guinea pigs, if you will, are Virginia and Virginia Tech in early January. They'll go out and Virginia will play Cal on one day. On the same day, Virginia Tech plays Stanford, and about 2 days later, they switch up. Syracuse doesn't go until I think it's late January.
Yeah, January
Uh,
29th.
how do you think that's going to play out? Those long trips, 2 games, being on the road for keeping all these college players on the road for 5 days essentially.
I would say I've always been a kind of an opponent of these crazy long road trips. But Stanford's football team just came out in here and was a 8 or 9 point underdog and just beat Syracuse in the Dome. So they got here, I guess, a day early, and maybe that helped them a little bit acclimate a little bit. But part of it too is these guys are flying. They're not flying commercial; they're flying in charters. Well, will they leave a day early? But then if you leave a day early, now you're really expanding the time that you're spending away from home, right? You're going to be gone for 6 days if they leave a day early on this trip. I don't know. I mean, Stanford and Cal are supposed to be two of the weaker teams in the conference. So if you have to play back-to-back really long trips, I guess it's good to play teams that aren't supposed to be that good. But again, who knows how good they'll be? We don't know until everybody starts playing, right?
Yeah. An interesting element to Syracuse's trip out there is that when Syracuse plays Stanford, I think it's on a Wednesday. Cal is on the road to SMU.
Yeah, but that's not, how far is that though from
I
California
don't
to
know, San
Dallas?
Francisco to
I don't know.
Dallas. But it's
I
interesting.
don't
They're
know.
not sitting at home. And then
Yeah.
when, a couple days later, when Syracuse plays Stanford, Cal goes to SMU. And I
Yeah,
haven't
well,
had
the
a
game,
chance to go down through the whole schedule to see if this is the norm.
yeah.
You
You
know,
know
like,
that. The interesting thing is, so the game is at 10 o'clock. They don't have a time for the Stanford game yet, but the game's at 10 p.m. Eastern time, right? So, we also, when Syracuse played in Hawaii, everybody's like, oh, what's going to happen with the time change? Well, and I don't think that mattered at all. I think the time change doesn't really matter all that much. And also, these kids are young and in really good shape. And, hopefully they'll be sleeping on planes. Hopefully they're going to have their rest and ever. But it's interesting that then, the thing that I really kind of don't like about this schedule is, so they're gone. Syracuse is gone for, say they leave Monday, right? On, 2 days, say it's January 27th. They leave Monday for that California trip. They get home Sunday. So they're gone for 6, 7 days. And then they got to play Duke. The next game that they play at home is against Duke. So that to me is like a little bit of a tough swing, And again, I'm not saying, I think probably a lot of teams are going to have that kind of, those going to be, when you go way out there and you come back, it's going to be tough, to come back and acclimate quickly. And then, but the Syracuse has a really tough game, probably the toughest game on their schedule coming back.
Probably, definitely the toughest game on their schedule, if we're to believe all the preseason
Right.
predictions.
Right.
That'll be against Duke. Okay, we've talked a lot about the ACC portion of the schedule
We
because
have.
that's what we just got on Tuesday night. We've known the non-conference schedule for a little while, but maybe just to refresh some folks' memories, what stands out to you about the non-conference?
Well, I'm interested to see them play Lemoyne. The first game is going to be interesting. Lemoyne had a pretty good year last year, all things considered. Their first year in Division One, they played really well. And Nate Champion and I had a long conversation about why they can't play in their postseason, which I think is ridiculous. But apparently
Yep.
there are rules for that. But it's always, to me, the most interesting game is the first game, right? Because we haven't seen this team, we don't see them practice anymore, so we have no idea what this team is going to look like. So I'm interested in the Lemoyne game. I don't know how good Lemoyne's going to be either. They've got a couple of transfers, and um, then of course the Legends Classic is going to be a big test. They play Texas, and then they play either Texas Tech or St. Joe's. Those are interesting games. Tennessee is going to be very good. They were very good last year. They don't have Dalton Connect this year, but they have a couple of other shooters that they got in the transfer portal, so they're going to be very good.
And they're supposed to
Um,
be a really good defensive team.
they're always a very good
Again,
defensive team. He's a really good defensive coach. They have a pesky little point guard who is like a tough kid and a really good ball distributor.
yeah, Zakai
Um,
Ziegler.
yeah, exactly. And he was hurt last year when Syracuse played them. He was just coming back from an injury. So that's going to be, I think all these games are interesting, honestly. How about you?
Georgetown.
Georgetown.
You
Yeah.
mentioned a whole bunch of games, so if I have
Yeah.
to mention one game that you didn't touch on, Georgetown. Um, Last year was Ed Cooley's first year as the coach down there.
Yeah.
He inherited a lot of a roster. He didn't do what Pat Kelsey did, where everybody got tossed out and he revamped everything. I think year two, Georgetown's going to look a lot different under Ed. For one, they'll have the Harvard transfer, Malik Mack, a DC
Yeah.
native.
Yeah.
He goes to Georgetown. He's an outstanding guard. So
Yes.
I think there's going to be I think it would be a very different look for Georgetown. I think Syracuse is in for a real test on that Saturday in the middle of December at the Dome against the Hoyas.
You and I have a different of opinion about Georgetown. Like, to me, the luster on that matchup has just disappeared once they got out of the Big East, and I feel like I don't care that much about that game anymore. I know there's going to be Syracuse fans who are going to crush me for that, but I just don't. That game doesn't really move me in any way whatsoever, honestly.
Yeah, I'm not even talking about it in terms of the rivalry, though. I was like, I just think Georgetown's going to be a lot better than last year. I
Well,
think,
it would be
Ed
hard to be
Cooley
worse.
given a
Yeah.
year, no, couldn't be too much
Yeah.
worse. Actually, they could be worse because I remember what they were like in the years before Ed got
Yeah.
there.
Okay. You make a good point. Yeah.
It was bad. So it'll be real interesting. And I remember Ed Cooley after that loss to Syracuse last year. You could tell a couple things. One, it had really hit him how much this rivalry did mean to some folks.
Oh yeah.
And all those Syracuse fans that were in the stands there down in DC, he didn't like that much.
Right.
And you could just tell that it ate at him a little bit. And he didn't want to come out and say it, but it's going to be different. I think Ed and Georgetown is going to have a completely different approach to a game against Syracuse going forward. I don't know. We'll have to
Yeah, we'll
see.
see. We'll see.
Well, Donna, this has been a lot of fun. I appreciate you taking a little bit of time out of your day to join us here on the podcast.
Of
Thanks to
course.
everybody else out there who listened in. We appreciate you too. So Enjoy it. We'll talk to you. Can't wait for the season. And we'll see you soon here on the pod.
Join us next time for the Inside Syracuse Basketball Podcast, presented by Crouse Health, the exclusive healthcare partner for Syracuse Athletics.